Welcome back to Legend of the King. In today's episode, we dive into Chapter 2, End of Drake's First Year. Join us as we explore the incredible growth and astonishing abilities of young Drake. But with his rapid development comes fear and suspicion from the community. Strange events unfold, leading to a dramatic confrontation. Will Michael and Celen be able to protect their son from the town's accusations? Stay tuned to find out. Chapter 2, End of Drake's First Year. Drake was growing at a phenomenal rate. It has been a year now since we adopted him, and he is the size of a 3-year-old. Walking around within a few months, his growth startled me. It had me wondering if the new milk he was getting was really that good. Every day he seems to be growing bigger, and we have noticed other things beginning to happen with him also. He was smarter, faster, and more coordinated than any other child his age. He may have been the size of a 3-year-old, but he had the mind of someone older, it seemed. Even though he did not talk, I noted how Drake got into the fridge and cupboards. He could not reach naturally, he was not that tall yet. But this child would take up the short stool from the living room, carry it into the kitchen, climb it, take out the food, carry it to his room where he would store it for later consumption, returning to play just as quickly. This was while I watched him. The boy did not feel he was doing anything wrong. It was normal to hoard food inside his room under blankets he was supposed to use to wrap himself. The thing that really made me look at Drake differently was the fact that he was learning what food he should hoard. At first, he would take any food he saw, but at some point, the meat and such things would spoil. Celen would have to clean up after him. It was normal at first to smell the odor of something foul when we entered his room. Now that never happened. I would delve into his hiding places and see that he picked up food ready to eat. Butter, snacks, vegetables, drinks, even cheese, but I would come hours later and see it gone. This boy was advanced for his age, and it shocked me. Celen was happy he was so adventurous, but I had younger siblings, I knew better. This was weird at best. Daily we watched him grow, and he learned things that any other 1-year-old would not even comprehend. It didn't worry us, as we thought having a genius would not be so bad. But you could tell some of the other people in the community seemed to wonder about him. There were rumors running around the community about where he came from and why he was growing so fast. We were a little scared of what was being said and the consequences of bringing so much attention to him. Celen was worried this attention may bring trouble to our family, as she related how people were treating Drake when she brought him outside. The British monarchy may even get word of the trouble and intervene. That was the last thing we wanted, to have to return the child because of the spreading attention. Then Evren and Fitz wanted to see us. We had no hesitation to inviting them into our home, although that was before we knew what the visit was all about. Everything seemed a little uncomfortable when they showed up. They seemed puzzled, a little set back. Things were a little awkward. They were tense and seemed to be under extreme pressure to be, well, normal. It started after hugs and some pleasantries. Celen offered some refreshments, but Evren and Fitz didn't partake in any of it. They talked about some of the local gossip, and then with serious faces, they abruptly turned the conversation towards Drake. Evren started by saying, "Celen, Michael, our visit today is actually on behalf of the community. We are a little troubled about some things that are happening around town. Though we knew something was coming, the question was just about what it was. Sensing trouble, I took the initiative." "What kind of things?" I asked. Fitz replied, "Well," with a look at Evren, Fitz continued saying, "Things like livestock being killed, mutilated, and maybe even eaten." "Oh my goodness," Celen said, horrified. McElroy's boy was trampled running from their horse corral. He had seen one of the dead horses and he ran screaming toward the house, when something came up from behind him and knocked him down and actually ran over him, stepping on his back and legs. "What? What was it? Is he okay?" I asked in alarm. "Yes. We thought at first it was one of the other horses, but the bruises left on him were really weird looking, like small feet or paws which covered his body." "Wow," I exclaimed. "But why are you telling us this? Do you really think this has something to do with us?" Evren was nervous as she looked at Celen. "I'm sorry, Celen, but they think that this weird stuff started after you brought Drake here. You know, with the way he is growing and the things he knows how to do at a year old. People are scared, and they are trying to find answers." Celen exploded. "And the only thing they can come up with is my 1-year-old child. Because he is advanced, he is different. They think he is some kind of monster, running around the town killing and eating animals, really." She paused, looking at the shocked looks on her guests. "While they sleep, he's supposed to turn into this monster and feed on livestock." Celen huffed and threw up her arms. Looking at this, I cringed. But it was an interesting thought. A damning thought at that. There was no way my son was a monster, but looking from the outside and I understood their fear. Drake may be strange, but he was not a monster. The problem was that the community sent them here, so it was already settled in everyone's mind that my son was to blame. Figuring out what was going on was important. If there was something going on, I would need to deal with this to exonerate my son. Involving the neighborhood, though, would only bring stress to Celen. Calmly, I demanded of them, "I think you should leave. I don't know how you could even think this. We have been friends for years. You have had dinner here played with Drake. Does he seem like that to you?" I said as I escorted them to the door. Celen's sobbing turned her back on them, refusing to even acknowledge their leaving. Evren tried apologizing again. "I am so sorry, Celen. They just thought it would be better coming from us rather than some strangers." She barely looked at her as she said it. The door now closed on them. The thought did cross my mind. Would it have been better coming from strangers? But our turmoil was not over. Jeff, the sheriff, a big burly man with a slow southern accent, came to visit us the next day. "Michael Wyvern?" he said unwaveringly. "Jeff." Calling him by his first name, I was wondering why he was being so formal with mine. The sheriff handed me a letter. "You have been served," and he turned around swiftly and left. No other words. I just stared after him. I had known the sheriff ever since we moved here. We hunted together, and just the other day we stopped into the store together and had a beer after work. Looking down at the letter, I wished life had not taken this turn. Slowly closing the door, I opened the letter. Who was that? Celen was staring at me with glossy eyes, appearing from the kitchen with a dusty apron, her hands littered with dried flour marks. Squinting her eyes at me, "Are you okay?" Actually, I was not. I'd already read this atrocious letter and was livid that it had come to this. "The sheriff," I said flatly, showing her the letter. "We have been served a summons to show up to the courthouse for a town meeting." "A town meeting for what?" she asked. My guess, the same thing Fitz and Evren tried to talk to us about last night. "Can they do this?" Celen asked, tears welling up in her eyes and starting to run down her cheeks. "Can they really just—" She started to weep. I grabbed her and held her tight, stroking her back and telling her it would be all right. What the hell was going on? This could not be real, and yet here we stood wondering what would be the next thing to happen to upset our lives. When Celen had settled down, I told her firmly, "The court appearance is in 2 days. We need to prepare. We need to know." Celen shook her head dismissingly. Deep down, we understood Drake was a strange child, but we thought he was blessed. The question was, did that blessing come with a terrible price? "He is a child, advanced in some respects, but just a child," Celen said. "He shows no signs of out-of-the-ordinary behavior. He certainly hasn't gotten up and left our house, by himself, to eat someone." Even so, I was starting to have doubts. I did not voice them to Celen. I just said we were doing this to gather evidence for our defense. But as much as we watch him, nothing happened. He did the usual actions showing his intelligence, turning on the TV, watching it, going to the bathroom on his own, eating with no assistance. I could not remember for the life of me when was the last time she had bottle-feed him. We took turns watching him in the night, a chair next to his bed. The crib he'd outgrown was right behind me. I just sat there and peered at my beautiful boy. I wished Drake could talk, speak for himself, tell the world it had nothing to fear. Sighing, I suppose Drake had some growing up to do before he starts giving speeches. Funny we should need something like that from him right now. The day came like a shimmering wind that graced us and tried to lift us up, but to where I wondered. Either way, Celen's face showed a nasty determination I could not match, but I was willing to try. We felt then, we were prepared to defend our child, defend him to the death if need be. Stepping out of the house heading to the courthouse, we were nervous. We stopped dead in our tracks. There was an old man sitting at the end of the walkway of our house. An old Indian man by the way he was dressed. He was clothed in leathers and had a band around his head with one feather hanging from it, just behind his right ear. He was sitting there chanting, rocking back and forth. As we walked slowly near him, his eyes opened, and he spoke. "I know what is happening to your son," he alleged. "I can protect him." I glanced at him. Celen merely hugged Drake closer and sped up. Stopping to look at him, his face a blank mask almost. It was like nothing was there, even as the cheeks rose and the eyes fluttered. Walking briskly off, we got into the car and rolled off down the road with uneasy haste. Silently, we drove, not wanting to think or talk about what just happened. But Celen couldn't take it any longer, turning to me asking, what did he mean he could protect Drake? Hands on the steering wheel and looking out the window, I just shook my head with an unknowing look. I don't know, Celen. I don't know. Once we reached our location, we leaped from the car and ascended the stairs. We both looked at the entrance to the courthouse, taking a deep breath as we opened the door. As we walked in, the room went silent, all eyes watching as we entered, each of them looking for the monster who was lording over their community. There behind me, they could see Celen holding Drake, balanced on her right hip as if to hide him behind me. He was so small, yet each of them seemed scared of him, worried he might change in a blink of the eye, but he didn't. The people of the community were already seated in the courthouse, which was really just an old building alongside the sheriff's office where they kept the records, and if needed, the county judge would hold court. It had been at least 15 years since the last time the judge came to Dant. The room was old and dusty, but you could tell that someone tried to sweep and clean up a little. Several chairs had been set out to accommodate the townsfolk and the wyverns. The council sat behind the large desk at the front of the room. The sheriff was there with the local store owners. They were considered the ones who ran this town, even though there was no official election. The sheriff walked over to greet us and showed us to our seats. Mr. and Mrs. Wyvern, please be seated. He gestured to the empty seats directly in front of the town council. He then went up to the desk where they sat waiting. Highly elevated on the platform, he was seated quite comfortably. The sheriff immediately called the meeting to order. Bang, bang, bang. The sound of the gavel striking the desk was loud and unneeded. This meeting is called to order. He turned to address the Wyverns, and in his best southern drawl explained, Mr. and Mrs. Wyvern, no one here has been charged with any crimes. Everyone is here to discuss both sides of our problem, hopefully in a calm and purposeful manner. This was ridiculous, he says that, and then expects us to kneel before his lies. Sheriff, what exactly is the problem? I asked. In reply, the sheriff cleared his throat and explained, the problem is one child has been injured, and several cattle, horses, dogs, and chickens have been killed or mutilated. Some even showed signs of being eaten, raw. The town is looking for answers to how and why this is happening. Anger brewing inside me, I stood up and replied, what does that have to do with our child? Mr. Wyvern, please calm down. To be quite honest, we have investigated the situation and came up with nothing. No coyotes, wolves, bears, mountain lions, or any other animal were conclusively found to be involved. Only the bruises on the boy gave us any indication it did not seem supernatural. There is no bird in the area large enough to do the devastation we have witnessed. In actuality, we had run out of possibilities, and I'm sorry to say, have now sought after the impossibilities, answered the sheriff as he looked around at the crowd. One of the local store owners spoke up. It started after you brought your son here. Nothing else has changed in the last 5 years except for that child. Another store owner replied, it also started with small animals, and now whatever it is, has taken to mutilating several of the larger livestock hereabouts. A little more settled, I asked only one question. Again, what does that have to do with us or our child? He is only 1 year old. He is big for his age and very smart, but he's not an animal. No, he's not, I said, shaking my head, refusing to believe any of this. The entire town started to talk at once, and the room was getting very loud. The sheriff took control of the crowd. He used the gavel on the table to quiet them all with ease. He then stated, Mr. and Mrs. Wyvern, we want to have you and your child seen by a doctor and monitored for a couple of days. You can stay in your own home, and the doctor will observe you. It would be as unintrusive as possible. Unintrusive? That was laughable at best. Just as we were about to argue against that, a screech emanated from the door hinge, echoing into our eardrums. We turned. Everyone did. The old Indian chief walked into the courtroom. Gasps were aplenty as he strolled into the courtroom. He announced, this family was, and is now, under the protection of the tribal council, and all inquiries will stop. The incidents that have happened will no longer happen. It will be taken care of. He had a very commanding voice, and the townspeople were completely silent. Everyone in the room sat stunned, not knowing what to say or do. No one spoke for a few seconds, and then the sheriff struck the gavel on the table. Several people jumped in their seats at the bang of the gavel. He then announced, this meeting is adjourned. All the townspeople filed out of the room without a peep. It just felt so surreal. It was odd, all that discourse and now just sober looks on their faces as they walked past the chief. The Indian chief was highly respected and considered a wise man. Interesting he was not a part of this sham court from the beginning. Or was he? He came conveniently enough. Still, even I knew the old council was facing the struggle of modern times, with disbelief in the old ways. That was probably why they never called him. These bastards did not want to give him the satisfaction. Selfish if they really thought they were dealing with impossibilities, should not a spiritual leader be called? It did not matter. I could look around. In their eyes, this wasn't over. If anything else happened, there would be trouble. We looked upon the chief with questions in our eyes, but he stood unspoken, thinking about what he was going to say. Thank you for joining us for Chapter 2, End of Drake's First Year. The stakes are getting higher as the community's fear grows. What will happen next to Drake and his family? Will they uncover the truth behind the mysterious events? Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next thrilling chapter of Legend of the King. Leave your thoughts and predictions in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next episode.